everybody. Is this working okay? Thank you for coming. My name is Tim Bussey. I'm the COO of Silicon Valley Education Foundation. And to put my role in perspective, Manny told me to keep these remarks brief to save room for the important people. So, thank you all for coming. I realize this is not the easiest place in the world to get to, despite the million-dollar name of Google. And we still have a few people strolling in, so we'll be patient for that. Special thanks to Google, of course, who's become a close partner of ours, providing volunteers, as well as we are the recipient of a Google.org 2-year grant right now. A few formalities here. The hashtags SVEF and College Readiness. Feel free to tweet and social media as your heart desires. Just a couple slides to open us up here. Every nonprofit needs a dragon to slay. This is no surprise to anybody in this room, but ours is basically the 2.4 million STEM jobs that are projected to remain unfilled by 2018, with only 16% of our high school seniors proficient in math and interested in a STEM career. So thank you for being a part of us addressing that problem. Very sort of informally who we are, dedicated to ensuring all students are college and career ready, specifically in the critical areas of STEM. Very formally, our vision and mission transform Silicon Valley into a model for enhancing public education, and the mission leveraging partnerships and resources for enhancing public education. The key words here are partnerships and resources, many of whom are in this room today, which we greatly appreciate. We cannot do our work without you guys. One more sort of high summary, sort of the way we see our organization, kind of 3 major lanes. The advocacy lane, for many years led by Manny Barbera, who will be running the show here in a couple minutes. A to G default curriculum, Eastside Alliance, Common Core, upcoming computer science, and college readiness. Our major programs, the signature program is, of course, 10 years plus running, the Summer Elevate Math program, now serving over 10,000 students, preparing them for the next level of math. And the 49ers STEM Leadership Institute in the Santa Clara Unified District, specifically targeted to high-achieving but under-resourced STEM, outstanding STEM students, 60 at each grade level from 7 to 12. And then finally, the innovation lane, which is highlighted by the Learning Innovation Hub, iHub, getting ed tech in the classroom, funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, now in its 4th year. With that, I'll turn it over to Manny Barbera.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Tim. Today, we want to have a discussion, a conversation about college readiness. And I think we've assembled an excellent panel. 2 people we're still waiting for. So one of them's on the first panel, so I may start talking slowly and try to stall. But we want to have a conversation about college readiness. And before we get started, I want to put some parameters around it. We know there are other factors other than academic reasons involved, but we're going to focus on the academic readiness. So we know there's socio-emotional, non-cognitive factors. We know there are fiscal barriers to going to college, but today we want to focus on academic readiness. And we also want to focus on not just enrolling in college, but what does it take to graduate from college? What needs to happen to increase the probability that students will actually graduate, not just enroll in college? So those are the parameters that we have set around for today. So I want to get started a little bit to share our position at the foundation, some of the ideas that we want to throw out here today, and then have a conversation with the people that are going to be on our panel today. We have researchers, we have practitioners, and we have advocates. And these are people either I've had an opportunity to work directly with, or people that had it very familiar with their work. So it's an excellent group of people. I think you're going to really enjoy hearing from them. So first of all, in terms of where our advocacy has been at the foundation is that districts adopt the A to G requirements as a default curriculum. I think most of you know what they are. There's the 15 courses that you have to take just to apply for the UC-CSU system. Common Core or not, this pathway has not changed. Those courses are still there, and they include 3 years of math, either the traditional algebra, geometry, algebra 2, or under the new options, integrated 1, 2, or 3 model that covers the same standards, the equivalent of algebra 2. And these are the courses that are there. And as I mentioned, we're going to be focusing especially today on the importance of math. Now, the inspiration for the work that, in terms of advocating for A to G, and these are the districts that we've been working with, came from a couple of places. Number one, I happened to be on the P16 Council with Jack O'Connell, where we were looking at what would be needed to close the achievement gap. We put out a publication on it, and one of our top recommendations is that districts adopt the A to G requirements. And we have with us today, as you can see on the list, these are districts that we've worked with, and on the bottom you'll see San Jose Unified First. Linda Murray will be on the panel today. She's the first district under her leadership that really took on the issue of A to G. She doesn't like it when I say this, but she's the mother of A to G. I like to give her credit. She was the one that had the vision to do this, and you're going to hear from here today. I also want to acknowledge you're going to have the superintendent from Eastside this evening on the panel, Chris Funk, who has been extremely supportive of A to G as a default. And originally when we started our work, it was when Dan Mosier was superintendent, who's here, works with me now at the foundation. I like to give Dan credit, and he's here in the audience. So Dan, thank you for being here. And the question that we're really raising is A to G enough? So I want to go through this. Completing the A to G requirements opens the door to enrollment. At least it allows you to apply. And we need to keep in mind that they are minimum requirements. It just simply allows you to apply, not any guarantee that you're going to get into your college of your choice. These are the numbers in California and Santa Clara County. I highlighted the Latino population there in red in Santa Clara County because of all the groups, it's the one that's lowest in the state. If you'll notice, Santa Clara County is higher than all the students, so 54.9% complete the A to G requirements. African Americans have a higher rate than the state. Asian has a higher rate than the state. Our white students have a higher rate than the state. Only the Latino Hispanic population is below the state. So I throw that out, just something to think about relative to our conversation today. I also would like us to be thinking in terms of not just enrollment, but what would it take from a preparation perspective to have students graduate, not just enroll in college, to graduate? What would be needed? So the A to G requirements are only part of the requirements. If you look at the Adelman study, we know that if students complete Algebra 2 in high school, about 40% of those students can be expected to graduate from college. All right? Now, we also might want to add on that it's not just enrolling in Algebra 2, you actually have to kind of learn it, right? So I think that's part of the issue with the 40%. And so we now have the grade 11 SBAC results. We used to have under the old system, the EAP system, the early assessment program, where students were able to take an additional set of questions to see if they were college ready in math, and they were specifically focused on Algebra 2. Now under Common Core, the expectations are that they would be minimally at standards, but to meet the equivalent of the to meet the equivalent of the old EAP, it would have to be exceeding standards on the grade 11 assessment. So that's a very high standard. The other thing, and my good friend Neil Finkelstein is going to be in a panel today with his research, that the senior year really matters for students. That if you take that fourth year of math, your probability of graduating from college, or the number of students, nearly doubles. So that fourth year of math is incredibly important in terms of students' readiness for college. And so really, I'd like to throw out there that the academic indicators, and I emphasize academic indicators, we know there are others, is that it's a combination of completing the A to G requirements, the grade 11 meeting standards, and completing 4 years of math puts you in the best track to actually giving students the best opportunity to graduate from college. And we have a situation that's going on right now. We have a lot of lower socioeconomic students who fit into that category. More are enrolling, going to college, but fewer are actually graduating. And so we need to take a look at why is that potentially going on. Also like to throw out the importance of extended time in the sense of, college really does begin in middle school. That students who leave 8th grade below standards, the probability, and again, there's always outliers. I just deal in probability and statistics. The probability that they're going to be college ready academically is very, very slim. That however they do at the end of middle school pretty much predicts the end of high school. And so that what we're really looking at, students are really going to need additional time. Actually, starting from at the end of 3rd grade, if they are not at standards on math, it's going to be very difficult for them to catch up without extended time. And we're not going to get into the elementary component here today, but the data is pretty strong on that. Norton Grubb talks about in one of my favorite books, The Money Myth, of how the achievement gap starts to expand, going from elementary to middle school and then into high school. That it really does begin in middle school. In summary, what we're going to be again recommending, we're going to be looking at A to G completion rates, students completing 4 years of math, achieving minimally at standards at grade 11 on the SBAC, meeting or exceeding standards by the end of grade 8 on the SBAC, and accelerating early and often through extended time. The recommendations are that districts adopt A to G as a default curriculum. Communicating to parents and students about college pathway. This is really, really critical. As an English learner myself, I always comment that I did not know the difference between a community college and a 4-year college. So it's information is power, and letting parents know early that there is a pathway. There are certain courses that their students are going to have to take in order to be successful. Offering the opportunity of extended time, interventions and acceleration at an early age, looking at the importance of middle school placement. College does begin in middle school. Misplacement in middle school can have some drastic consequences down the line in terms of student success in completing the college readiness academic requirements. And also taking a look at districts, looking at 4 years of math as a default. Long Beach Unified is looking at that. I just had a conversation with Chris Lund there, and they're looking at 2019 and 20. They will be moving to 4 years of math as a default for their students, so that they will be strongly recommending that students take 4 years of math when they graduate from Long Beach Unified. So what we're going to be looking at is that college is possible, and looking at not just on high school readiness, but on college readiness and what those academic requirements might be. So at this point, I'd like to ask our panelists to actually, maybe Neil, you go first, and then the panelists will come up. I'd like to introduce the senior researcher from Wested, Neil Finkelstein. He's been a strong partner with the foundation. We've had several studies as part of our Eastside Alliance, and he's done a lot of work on college pathways, and we're delighted to have him with us here today to share some of his work, and then we'll have the panelists come up and we'll begin on the discussion. So please welcome Neil.
Good morning. Thank you, Manny. How's that sound check? Is that all right? Can you hear me okay? Yeah? Great. That's me. Pleasure to be here, and thank you, Manny, and thanks to the Silicon Valley Education Foundation for years of partnership. I feel as a researcher you need places and people to work with over long periods of time, and many of you in the school districts in the Silicon Valley area, both on the east side and the west side, have been wonderful institutional partners for years and years, and really do thank you and the staffs of the school districts for being so wonderful to work with over these years. Some of these insights come from a variety of studies. I'm going to try and orient the discussion to where do we stand as a state and how does it matter to connect the A to G policies that we think about to the themes of course sequencing, which is really, in essence, what A to G is about and how we help our students get there. So let's dig in a little bit. A map of the United States. You can't really read the numbers, but you can see the colors. If I gave you a little bit of a hint here that the lightest yellow color is between 6 and 16%, and this orangey color is between 16 and 20%, dark brown in the central part of the country, 25 to 29. Well, what are we measuring? We're measuring the percent of students who start 9th grade and then go through 4 years of high school and end up in a bachelor's granting program and graduate with a bachelor's degree within 6 years of starting. So if you take a 6-year normative time estimate for bachelor's completion, add it to 4 years of graduation, how many of those 100 students who started as high school freshmen get through? And so then this number in California, sort of kind of in the range of 16 to 20%, leads you to believe that there's some sort of a pipeline problem going on. How could you start with 100 students and only get 16 to 20 out at the other side 10 years later with a bachelor's degree? And the disparities around the country are something for a different kind of conversation. It's about poverty, it's about intergenerational patterns of higher education achievement and aspiration, it's about economic growth and sustainability, it's about a lot of things. In California, if we look at the leak in a little bit more detail, here's just a little bit more kind of refined timeline thinking about it. The 4 bands, it's a little hard to see. The top line is LA County. These colors are repeated. So this turquoise color, does everybody agree that that's turquoise? Somebody think it might be chartreuse? We'll go with turquoise. Turquoise is LA County. The navy blue is the Inland Empire. This purple color is the San Joaquin Valley. And the dark orange at the bottom is the state. But if you pick any one of the bars, and you can see that they trend in parallel, same idea. You start with 1,000 students in 9th grade at the very top of our graph. Everybody's entering high school. And by the time you end up coming down to the bottom with a bachelor's degree from the UC or CSU, you're in the range of 225 students, or 22% of students at the end of the pipeline. So it's a pretty compelling problem to solve when we know so much in our studies of labor economics, the enormous dependency on a college degree in order to make students really keep up with inflation, keep up with earning power, middle-class jobs for middle-class wages. We know that these bachelor's degrees are incredibly important and really are the thing to look toward. The community college work is fabulous work, and it's probably a conversation for a slightly different day about how and in what ways community college badges, credentials, course enrollment, dual enrollment provide opportunities for students on the way sometimes to an associate's degree, on the way sometimes to a 2+2 transfer into higher education institutions for a bachelor's degree. Let's keep going on the pipeline. We're doing better. And I think it's really an important thing to say today, that we're doing better. I've been at this work for 25 years. Many of you in the room have been at this for longer. But if we look around the state at the changes in the number of students who are completing college preparatory work leaving high school, we used to think of about 35% at the beginning of the 2000s, and we're up to about 43% in the most recent data that's been collected. It's really quite an accomplishment to think of the vast, vast, vast majority of students who really do see college as their aspiration. When I'm in high schools, often in the lobby, you'll see index cards on the walls of the entryway where students have written about their aspirations when they graduate. And overwhelmingly, 60–70% of students now will make a declaration early on in their years that what they hope to do immediately following high school is college. It could be community college, it could be a bachelor's degree program, it could be some combination of work and college. But the memo about college aspirations has really changed considerably over the last generation. The remediation problem is sticky, and I want to point out here that that's on the table for today's discussion. As much as we're moving students through in greater numbers and greater proportions as ready for college, we're still stuck on this remediation problem, which may be the thorniest problem, in my judgment, in higher education policy and in this bridge between K-12 education and higher education. How is it that we end up remediating 60, 70, 80% of students at the community college level in math and in English? How is it that 40% of students in the California State University system still need some remediation in math? And remediation, let's be really clear about it, it's remediation back to algebra. When we remediate students at the college level, we're remediating back to 9th grade standards. That's where we find these really, really troubling gaps. New policies in the California State University system, which are very bold. An executive order signed this summer by the Chancellor of the California State University says the California State University system won't offer remedial sequences anymore. We just won't do it. Our students are going to come into the system prepared, and when they're not prepared, we're going to help them through preparation sequences before they get here. And when they get here, they're going to earn credits for the courses they take and the time they use. And we're going to think about new ways to deliver instruction to make sure that our students get through. So I would stay tuned on this tension over preparation sequences and remedial courses and offerings as we move forward over the next decade. The A to G sequence that Manny put up on the board, and I put it up on the board slightly differently, it's so stair-stepped. Goodness gracious, I mean, what could be more linear than to say, I'm a 9th grader, I take a math course, an English course, and one other A to G course. I pass all those courses. Wonderful, I go on to 10th grade. The stair-step looks so logical here. And in practice, it's not like that at all. So many students have really very, very windy paths through these sequences. And many students, as you know, end up being kind of jumbled up at the time that they're juniors and seniors trying to understand where did courses go right, where did courses go wrong, when were credits earned, when were credits not earned, what was the course I took that somebody told me met A to G requirements, but it really didn't, what do I do because I moved from out of state, and what do I do because I'm new to this country, what do I do because I've struggled in a course, what do I do because of something that I took online or in a different way. So the sequence that's so linear here really is very misleading, and I think that that's the point. As I said, with all this complication, the line isn't flat, the line goes up, and so we have more students creating or finishing these A to G sequences, but we also know that we're leaking students. So how does it happen? I'm going to take you through a brief example, and I'm just going to show you that the leaks are known about early on. And if you think that this problem can be solved with students who are juniors and seniors in high school, I hope that Manny's comments and my comments and other panelists will help you understand that it just starts so much earlier, and that the middle school attention to these course sequences is really the best we can do at helping these high school pathways be smooth. Look at this set of students who are going through their math requirements on their way to meeting the A to G requirements. They're supposed to finish 3 courses that meet A to G requirements, and as Manny said, as we agree, 4 years of math is a really important benchmark for students. Start out with a group of students, and they're supposed to pass 1 course as 9th graders. The magic in reading these charts are these red lines, because these little tiny red lines, first one over the number 1, the second one in 10th grade over the number 2, third one over number 3, just says that I'm earning a year of credit for a course I took 1 year at a time. I'm a 9th grader, I earn a year of math credit by taking algebra. I'm a 10th grader, I earn a year of math credit for taking geometry. And so it goes. But the numbers don't pan out. So the percent of students who earn 0 or half a credit is 31 and 11, is 42% of the students don't get through 9th grade intact. And then we go on to 10th grade, and who's not meeting all of their requirements to get to the number 2? 16 and 7 is 23, 33, 42, 52, 53% of students have fallen off and have not earned 2 full credits in math by the time they're 10th graders. So we go to 11th grade. How does it happen? 10% of students earn 0 credits, 10 and 5, 15, 25, 26, 36, 46, 51, 63% of students off track before they're at the end of their 11th grade by not having earned 3 credits. I've used this chart before. I know the numbers by heart. The point, I think, is pretty obvious, that the accumulation isn't linear and many students are struggling very early on. When we've looked at work over many years, and I again thank all of the people who partnered with us on putting big data sets together to link middle school data with high school completion data, grade 7 is such an incredibly pivotal time for students in math. It's so predictive of most things that happen later on. A strong foundation in Math 7, those skills are absolutely fundamental. And we know that if you're not proficient early on, it's not going to go well. Indeed, students who take algebra in grade 8 and geometry in grade 9 and algebra 2 in grade 10 on a relatively traditional sequence do very, very well, making sure that they have room for calculus later on. But the smaller type on the bottom can't be overstated. It doesn't work very well if the foundations in grade 7 aren't strong. When students repeat courses, it doesn't go well. And so when we think that things aren't going well and we end up repeating students, the repetition of same courses taught similar ways actually doesn't yield very, very encouraging results. We need to concentrate on these middle school programs. Final slide is, we can send these around and you can look at them, but read from the bottom. The proportion of the sample who didn't take a math course in 12th grade, a third of students in California don't take math as seniors in high school. That's really a problem if you're trying to go onto a smooth transition into college. And up here, a number that I think is a little bit important to keep in mind, the proportion of our sample who ever repeated Algebra 1, Geometry, or Algebra 2, just about half of students in the state. So these are generalized from sample data, but I think I'm pretty close to true on these. I'd like to leave you with a very simple idea. The A to G course sequence is about planning for what's the ultimate bunch of courses when you graduate from high school, and we start that discussion in middle school. Thank you for being here. I look forward to your questions.
So I'm going to ask the first panelist to come on up and join us up here. So after I retired as superintendent 8 years ago, one of the best part of my job is I've gotten to meet and work with some outstanding people, and the panelists you're going to meet today fit that criteria. And this is the first group. You have their kind of their bios, so in the interest of time, I'm not going to go into details on that. I am going to ask each one of them to briefly introduce themselves, say a little bit about their organization and their work, and then we're going to engage in some conversation. Now, if you have questions, who has the cards? Okay, so Justin back there has cards that if you, and also Keith, raise your hands. So if you have a question, they will come around, just kind of raise your hand, they'll give you a card, write it down, bring it up, and then we'll ask the panelists, and we'll use that same format during the day. So they're back here, just raise and pick up a card, and then we'll go from there. So we're going to get started, and we'll just, to my left, we'll start with you, Jim. Good to see you.
Nice to see you.
And again, a little bit about yourself and your organization.
Thank you, Manny. Thank you all for being here and having me. My name is Jim Hollis, and I'm the Executive Director of the Calculus Roundtable. We're a nonprofit organization that works to promote math and science skills for students, particularly students of color. We work in conjunction with 46 school districts in California, 4 county offices of education, and we do after-school programs as well. So we're sort of a vertical education organization in terms of implementing policy, and at the state level, we've done some work with West Ed in the past. And then we also do training and coaching of principals and teachers, and we run after-school programs. So we're able to see sort of the whole gamut of education. We have about 350 students right now in an online after-school STEM program in the Bay Area, and that's my story. I'm sticking to it. Thank you for having me.
Hello, everybody. I'm Vera Jacobson-Lundberg. Thank you all for inviting me, especially Manny, to be able to share my part of this. So I have a little different story. I have an AA degree in medical assisting. I went to community college, my first go-around. So I have that I'm going to bring to what I'm going to share with you. But then I went back to school when I was older, and I got all my fancy formal education, and I have a BA in theater, and I have a master's in creativity. I have 5 teaching credentials, and a couple of years ago I got a doctorate in social justice. Great, that's great. I'm an academic. But more importantly, I was in the classroom for 23 years working with marginalized youth. So a lot of my thinking comes from actual listening to students, and helping them realize their own dreams. So I have that sensibility that I will bring to you. Then I am the San Mateo County Office of Education, a career and technical education coordinator for the county, and I'm helping work at our county to align the students' needs and desires with the workforce needs and demands, and helping education get in the groove of the alignment. The one thing I do have to read, though, this is Ed Code 33080. Each child is a unique person with unique needs, and the purpose of the education system of the state is to enable each child to develop all of his or her own potential.
Thank you, Vera. Claudia?
Hello, everyone. Thank you all for being here, and thank you, Manny, for inviting me. My name is Claudia Morales. I'm with the University of California Center for Educational Partnerships, and the Center for Educational Partnerships at UC Berkeley is the unit that houses all of our pre-college programs. We have 11 pre-college programs. We are in over 125 high schools. We're in 68 community colleges. We service over 72,000 K through 12 and community college students and their families, nearly 26,000 6th through 12th grade and community college students receive very intensive cohort-based one-on-one type of support during their tenure with us in our programs. And we serve additionally in school-wide services. We service over 45,000 students around the state of California. So I'm very happy to be here and share a little bit about the work that CEP does in our communities.
Okay, thank you, Claudia. Well, Neil, anything else you want to say in terms of your own?
No, I would only say that I'm from West Ed. We're based in San Francisco. It's a research and service organization that's worked with schools all over the country, and we're very interested in so many of these, bringing research ideas into practical application and learning from practice about how researchers can be relevant, and hopefully there's a little bit of good, healthy tension around that discussion.
Thank you. I'm going to start with you, Jim. So you started the Calculus Roundtable.
Yes, yes.
What inspired you to do that? What was the thinking behind it?
Other than you and your work. But, you know, going to some of these panel discussions, Manny, one of the things, and we've worked together over the years. I came from the BASRAC, the Springboard Schools, Pivot Learning Partners, sort of a school reform background. And one of the statistics that I saw that was very disturbing to me about 4 years ago was that in the 9 Bay Area counties that make up the Bay Area, there were less than 100 African Americans enrolled in calculus classes in the 9 counties, which is shocking, surprising, and not surprising all at the same time. And so not that we think that calculus is the right pathway for all students, but it is a barometer of the education system of that district, of how many students it is able to move into calculus. So we started looking at those numbers in particular as a barometer for our work and how we could help to move students into calculus. And it starts, as we have found over the years, in middle school and in elementary school in some cases. So the earlier we can get those algebraic concepts to kids, the better off they are.
That's an astounding number. Less than 100 in the 9 counties.
In the 9 counties. And we have backed that up for the last 2 years. We haven't checked this year. And because the state doesn't actually store that data,
Right.
particularly we had to do some polling of schools and looking at the AP test and what students were taking the AP test, and sort of go back from there. But in the last 2 years that we've checked, it has still not reached over 100 students.
Well, we're going to come back to that in a little bit. Claudia, the question I have for you is, you're working specifically to reach low-income students, help them through the pathway of college. How do you do it?
Well,
What's your solution to help this happen?
Well, I was gonna, in thinking of this question, I'm gonna highlight 2 of the things that we do at CEP.
And but if I can just feel free to want to make this a discussion, so if you want to ask each other questions or jump in, don't wait for me to ask the question. So Claudia, please go
Great.
ahead.
So I'll highlight one of the 11 programs that we have at CEP, and that's the Destination College Advising Corps. For us, this has been a really wonderful model to roll out. It's a young program. It's only 10 years old. But the idea is that we recruit first-generation low-income college graduates just coming out of their bachelor's degree, and we place them full-time at high schools after giving them a lot of very intensive college access and college just awareness training. And it's a near-peer model, so it's a little bit like American Idol. You can't be older than 26, can't be out of school for more than 2 years. So that, there are challenges that come with that model, but I think that what we've seen over the last 10 years with DCAC is just the ability for students to connect with our DCAC college advisors in a way that those of us who are a little longer in the tooth just cannot. We talk about, when I went to college, we used to, chip out our papers on stone tablets, versus the DCAC advisors are able to talk to students about what it's like in college right now and what it took for them to graduate from college, and not just to get into college, but to get through college. As part of that, we provide, the Center for Educational Partnership has curricula that we create, and so we have actually kindergarten through 12th grade student curriculum, as well as a kindergarten through 12th grade family curriculum that coincides with that. So along with that, it has all of we kind of took what a 12th grade student should know, backed it all the way to kindergarten, what a parent of a senior should know, and back that all the way up to kindergarten. So there's just I think there's a lot of different things that we do, but I would highlight the fact that we have this program with advisors is one of the strongest things that we've been able to do with the Center for Educational Partnerships. And currently we have 47 advisors in high schools throughout the Bay Area. My work specifically is in San Jose, and we have advisors at all 6 comprehensive high schools in San Jose Unified, and 5 out of the 11 at Eastside, and a few of the charter schools in San Jose. And so it's just been a really great model of being able to provide the advisors with a lot of those of us who have been in the field for a long time, provide them with the expertise, the training, and the support, but then then allowing these young people who are just incredibly fabulous. It's like a work of art watching them interact with students. It truly is. And then on top of that, some of them we've kind of inadvertently created a pipeline that we didn't intentionally set out to do, but many of our advisors have graduated from the high schools that they now, after going to college, are coming back to do their service at their high schools. And so that in and of itself just adds a whole other layer of connectivity and just relatability and everything else with the students. So that's a small example.
So they can serve as role models, in essence. They come back to their
Yes,
school.
as role models, as just the aspirational piece of, yes, I can do it because you came from the same neighborhood and even from the same school in some instances. So yes, for sure.
What academic level? Are they freshmen, juniors, sophomores that you're bringing into that?
Or who they're servicing, or the actual advisor fellow?
The advisors.
They are college graduates, so they have their
graduates,
bachelor's
great,
degrees.
great.
They are no longer college students. They've graduated. It's very similar to Teach for America that way. They have to have their bachelor's degree, but they're spending 2 years with us in a fellowship trying to really solidify what it is they want to do, go into grad school, what type of. We have a lot of advisors. The majority of our advisors stay in education, but many of them, when they come to us, don't really know if they want to be a counselor, do they want to be in the classroom, and that ability to be with us for 2 years. It's as much as it is a service to the school, it's a service to these young people, because just because you graduate, I'm a first generation college student, and just because you graduate from college doesn't give you any more knowledge or awareness of what you want to do with your life, or necessarily what path is best for you. So it allows them to give service, and at the same time for us to provide that professional development and that growth in them, so that they really know what they want to do once they leave the fellowship, because they can only stay with us for 2 years.
For 2 years. That's great. Vera, so we know not everyone's going to go to college, right? I mean, this comes up all the time. Take it one step left. Not everyone can be an engineer, computer science. Your role with CTE, how are you trying to address that issue?
Well, I once had a parent say to me, this is years ago in Rowland Heights back in 2007, and she had 4 children and she was a board member. And she said to me, college is not a career. And that made me think. That was really a big turning point for me because we worked so hard in education and I had this huge at-risk program and I was going to make sure every kid, and I'm pushing. And I thought, college is not a career unless you're going to be a college professor. It's another place of learning and exploring yourself as a person. So that kind of tweaked my brain to think, okay, if college is not a career, in education, that's why I read you the purpose of education from the Ed Code. It's for us to help the child discover who they are as people and how they plan to fit into the world. And being in the classroom for 23 years and listening to my students and listening to them, some of them had gigantic goals and we enabled and supported that. Other students said, no, I want to have a 9-to-5 job and then I want to go home and I want to have my own life with my own family. So, okay, everybody's different. So CTE in California is called Career Technical Education, but around the United States it's called Career and Technical Education. So are we spending enough time and focus on what is a career education to help students become informed about career intelligence? That's one thing I want to say. I think all students need some form of post-secondary education in this new world order of ours. But the 4-year degree, I just looked this stat up this morning because I want to make sure I was spot on. And so the stat is that 35% of the California jobs from 2012 to 2015, 2025, 35% will require a BA or higher. This is in California. So I know we're in a bubble and we are it and we're the innovation capital of the world and everything great and wonderful. So that's probably skewed. But in the state, 35% will require the BA or higher. So what does that mean? 30% are those middle jobs, those middle skill jobs, the 2-year post-secondary AA degree or certification. Wow, that's something to really pay attention to. I went to CSM, I have an AA degree in medical assisting. That served me well for 18 years. And I got to learn about hospitals. For example, an x-ray technician. That's a wonderful job. If you're the person that would find that to be a wonderful job. They make good money, they have benefits, they do interesting work, they do work with diverse populations. What a great job, and it's not going away right now. The robots haven't taken that over. So that's the kind of thing we're talking about when we think about career and technical education, paying attention to students' needs and wants and desires, and seeing where the workforce is and trying to align them with that. The other stat I have is that the middle skill jobs demand, 47% of job openings, 2020, will be in this middle skill, the technician, like you were saying. So the stats I know, for every scientist or engineer, you need about 3 to 5 technicians. Those are wonderful, wonderful jobs. They're middle class. We can take large groups of students coming from the lower socioeconomic and move them right into that for sure. So college for all, I think, needs to be just rearranged a little bit. It's post-secondary education for all.
Thank you, Vera. So Jim, the question for you. You mentioned earlier about that statistic, which I think is stunning. Less than 100 African Americans in calculus. What's your opinion? Why is that the case? Why aren't more kids of color in general?
Yes. Yeah, it's not just African Americans. Well, it's a good question. I think that I'll give you my thought and an example of one of our students. There is not enough classes in calculus, right? In the state of California, there are, I think, 16 algebra classes that are offered in the state of California and 4 calculus classes. So the variety of classes that are offered makes that pipeline very, very thin to get into those classes. So you can't you can't pay your way into those classes. You have to earn your way into
It's
those
like an
classes.
access issue then?
It is definitely an access issue. I think it really is. I think that we had a student who went to Oakland Tech, and this student was in a public high school, but he had gone to private school for elementary and middle school, was a very straight A student. When he got to Oakland Tech to get into the magnet programs for engineering, there were only a certain number of slots available, because they had one FTE teacher to be able to do that work, right? So he took the examination test and he got 93.5, and it took 94 literally to get into the class, right? They did not, we pushed to the school, we had the parents write a letter, no space. Not that they didn't want it, they didn't have space for that student. So, well, that happens, but what happened to him? He didn't go into a pre-engineering magnet program. He went back to everyone else who had scored 65 or 75 into that class. So there was no ladder for him to be in that program. So he lost almost a year. If he had not been in our program, of course, but so that's part of the issue. You know, it's sort of like I always say that, you know, the higher level math, especially calculus, in the way we teach it, is very much like finger painting, right? You wouldn't start finger painting class by saying, well, we're going to start looking at the chemical reaction of paints, and we're going to look at the eye coordination. You start with doing the work. So a lot of what we do is bore the students out of their minds with formulas and protocols, without doing the actual work. So the quicker we can have them muck around in math and science, the better off they are. So we try to bring as many concepts, calculus and algebraic concepts, as low as possible, without telling them what they're working on until they accomplish it.
Would the rest of you want to comment on why you think that's such a low number? A follow-up question for Jim. Anyone want to comment on your?
Well, I think it'd be fascinating to understand how the students who have been successful, what their trajectories had been from relatively early ages, and how the schools filtered and their supports either encouraged or discouraged all the way through. What can you tell us about kind of the 6 or 7 year sequence that ends up with that calculus senior?
You know, we're doing work here in the Bay Area, but we've done specific work around this issue in Los Angeles at a high school, Jefferson High School in East LA. And we helped them to build an algebra boot camp. That was very successful. So we built sort of a remediation at the lower end and made it mandatory for students who didn't get a B or higher. So there was not a level of like you have failed, so you're in this class of failures. It was you have not gone to the most successful point, so you need a little bit of boosting. So it gave all students an ability to be in that class without thinking they were at the bottom tier, but it also pushed the middle students higher, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So we ended up pushing more students into calculus because we didn't say it was required, but we gave the cultural acceptance that it was required, as was the lower level. So they weren't sort of chastised by being too smart, which kids are just as worried about as being too dumb. Right? So we put both of those things there, and we ended up moving more students to calculus through that process. So we squeezed them up there.
So let me ask a follow-up question with that, because I think you brought up an issue now we get into equity. I'm going to guess that if I went to Palo Alto High School, unified district,
Right.
guns, so forth, and asked them, I said, do you have a problem with kids getting into calculus? I'm going to guess that's not going to be a problem, right?
For
In
the
fact,
for the teachers?
yesterday I
Yes.
was at Saratoga High School, and I could tell you it's not a problem for them. This is an equity issue now that we're dealing with.
Yes, yes, very much so. You know,
And a racial equity issue.
it is a racial equity issue. It is. It's also a class issue
Class,
too.
yeah.
You know, we like to talk about kids having a college-going network attached to them. Right. So when you ask a doctor what you look at doctors, what are the things they have in common? They have uncles and daughters and brothers and aunts who are doctors, right? So there's a connection to that that practice. So the more you can give students a connection to these practices, the better off. We also see students who really, first generation students particularly, who really want to go to college and they're leaders in their family doing lots of other things. And we had a young girl who wanted to be a nurse. She was a 3.8 student. She was hell-bent on being a nurse, and as soon as she got in college, she realized she didn't have any math. No one told her of the math ladder that she needed to climb. So a lot of times
it's
sort of
access of availability and information then.
and yes, I say, so the prejudice comes in sort of low expectations. You know, that you don't need that class. You have enough credits to graduate.
Exactly.
Going into CTE, which I'm a big fan of and done a lot of work in that area, but you have to have the foundations for those careers. You know, we talk here at Google, who has been a leader in at least making these issues around equity in terms of science and technology apparent. They recently produced their hiring by ethnicity, and it was less than 2% of African Americans were hired at Google. That means not only the engineers, but the street cleaners, the people in the lunchroom, less than 2%. Right? So if you take that number by the number of employees there here, it is easier for a black boy in East Palo Alto to be an NFL quarterback than to be an engineer at Google.
Ooh,
Wow.
wow.
So that has to
Let
change.
that sink in.
Yeah, that's sink in.
Let that sink in. So we're going to get back to this again. Claudia, let me come to you for just a second. You mentioned the work you do with families.
Yes.
Like, given everything, why is that so important?
Well, it ties into everything that we're here. I mean, our viewpoint at the Center for Educational Partnerships is that all students need to be eligible. It is incumbent on us as the adults to make sure that all students have access to all options. CTE is not just an option for students who are not four-year bound.
Right.
It should be an option for all students, and if we prepare all students, you know, we don't even have to get into the argument of who should go where, and that college isn't for all. It's just that all students should be prepared, and then they have that, like you read in the ed code, they have that ability to choose for themselves what they would like to do, because we work with plenty of students who can go straight into a four-year and choose, like they want to be, you know, a hairstylist, or they want to go to culinary school, they want to do other things, but they have a base of knowledge, or go into a certification program that needs that. Medical assisting needs science and math.
Yes, it does.
And so for us, the work with parents is incredibly important, because it's part of that network. It's part of that capital that families who have gone to college can give to their children. My conversations with my daughters are very different than the ones that my parents, who are farm workers, were able to have
How's
with
that?
me. Oh my goodness! I mean, I
How much
can't
time
even.
do you have left?
My daughter just started high school, and we were talking about this very thing, about the A to G requirements in math and getting to calculus and having that be an option. They talk about the options of where they're going to go to college versus not even understanding what that concept meant. You know, my parents, you know, didn't have any base of knowledge for it, so it was, you're going to go, but I have no idea how you're going to do it, you know. I think being able to give families the information and give it to them early. You know, my experience personally in working with San Jose Unified for the past, 13 years, they've adopted our college knowledge parent workshops, and they start in kindergarten with them. And they are grade level specific once you hit middle school and high school, because it's very important that a sixth grade parent know what a sixth grader needs to do in order to be, confident enough to take that next step. When they're seventh graders, there's another set of things to do when you're in seventh grade, and then so forth and so forth, right? So I think that being able to do very deep work with families, and being able to align like what the students are learning with, making sure that the families are learning every step of the way, and they're starting to have these conversations, and that they also have someone to go to if they have questions. So we really see the family, without the families, students have a huge hurdle to cover if they're wanting to continue any type of education after high school. So that's really important.
Good, Vera, good.
I'd like to just jump into what you were saying too. career and technical education changed, and it was so different from the old voc ed when I was a kid. No, it's not that anymore, and it was a conjunction change, and it went from or to and.
How did it change? Yeah.
Because
it
it
different?
became a big equity issue, because it was, in my day, college kids were white, and they were, and that it was tracked. And then the kids that were going to become auto mechanics, which right now is really a cool job, but auto mechanics went that way, and there was a lot of kids of color. So they killed the voc ed model. That got killed in the early 90s when it was called School to Career. And then about 10 years later, they rebirthed it, and it's called College and Career. I'm sorry, no, not college and career. Career and Technical Education. So everybody needs a career, whether you're a doctor, you're an engineer, you're an x-ray tech, a receptionist, I don't know, all up and down the spectrum. Everybody needs a career. So career and technical education is really rigorous. There's no no. And what is interesting is you can get on and off your pathway of your educational journey, like I did. I did 2 years of AA degree. And then I spent 18 years not doing anything that was interesting. I did a lot of stuff, but I was an entrepreneur. I was a real estate agent. I was a medical assistant, on and on. And then I went back on the freeway of my educational pathway to go get all my education all the way to the top. And so that's what we're talking about. It is really rigorous. So I just want to make sure, because what you're saying, helping children understand who they are and how they're going to fit into the world, and it is very rigorous. It's not academics and career tech ed anymore. No, they're together.
We still have the same issue that you have with A to G, which is that families don't know what the requirements are or how to get onto those on-ramps. So you still have that same equity issue of it being sort of isolated from the students who might need it the most.
Yeah, I would just add into the conversation. I think the opportunity for students to follow these career pathway sequences from high school into the community college, they've never been better.
No, that's
and
absolutely
as
right.
you've said, Vera, the number of opportunities, and I like your example in the allied health fields in particular, whether it's somebody who wants to be a radiology technician, or somebody who wants to be a phlebotomist, or somebody who wants to go into skilled nursing for care for the elderly. I mean, these are enormously rapidly growing fields with tremendous shortages in many, many urban markets. And at the same time, I think it's important to communicate how hard, in our discussion today, the math requirements are to complete those programs in a timely way. So it does circle us back a little bit to being reminded of the concerns about the remediation rates in math and about the efficiency with which some of our students can move into these pathway pipelines, where they're using their time efficiently, they're earning credits efficiently, they're using their grant money efficiently, and they're able to reach these badges and credentials in an efficient way.
Good. Yeah, jump in.
So to talk about this, really, at San Mateo County Office of Ed, we've come up with a pilot idea, working with Junior Achievement, that we are saying career and technical education for all, starting in kindergarten, not middle school. And I'm going to shove them all into becoming a nurse when they're 5 years old. No, that's not it at all. It's having, and this is Dr. Kevin Fleming's work, career exploration, he explains, it starts with having the child understand who they are. It's self-reflective practice. Why can't we, in those elementary school grades,
Absolutely.
along with parent education, do some self-reflection? And the teachers could do that. I did that as a teacher myself. And I will tell you, my students in high school would come up to me and say, I don't know the answer to that question. And I said, I don't either, because it's from you. And they didn't think about it, because nobody's taking the time to stop and do self-exploration. And that's what we could be doing in those elementary schools, along with parent education. Getting into the middle school, where you can do exploratory wheels, tasting and sampling and doing more career exploration. And then by the time they're in high school, they can do some application. So we have a pilot that we're just proposing to 2 of our school districts on this, working with Junior Achievement, because they already are doing this in the schools.
So when Neil was in kindergarten, he didn't say, I want to grow up and work for West Ed as a senior.
You might have. You might have.
Maybe.
Again, a reminder, if you have any questions, please feel free to fill out a card and we can bring them up.
The other thing, quickly, I'm just
jump in,
what you just said about Neil and his career path, that I just checked, we're here at Google, which was founded in 1998. right? So this whole place didn't exist when we were thinking about what kind of careers we wanted. So we have to be very careful, and I've learned this about being connected to community colleges, which I didn't know before, is how much their curriculum is tied to the economic needs of that community. We just had this with that example I gave about the girl who wanted to be a nurse. We found out from community colleges, oh, they were shutting down the nursing programs because now we have enough. Well, no one's telling Maria that they're shutting down those programs. So again, the communication for where the classes are being offered and to whom has to be a lot more tied to their imagination and their interests, I think.
Claudia, you said something that triggered something personal in me, and I want to tie it into something that Neil said. And it's probably the same for you. So college for me was nice if you can go. I didn't raise my kids that way. My kids was, where will you go? It's a different in mindset, right? It sounds to me that's what you're trying to instill with the information. And if maybe you can connect it to, Neil, what you said, basically based on your data, by the beginning of 10th grade, over 50% are out of, they're done. They don't even know that if they decide, like the example you said that, now I'd like to go to college, there may not even be an option. Do you want to comment in terms of what you do with the parents and the mindset and that specific data point?
Well, I think that what we try to do is really support parents to be able to advocate, to feel empowered by the information and not just know this information, but turn around and advocate for their students, for sure. But the slide is really, it is about access, and it is about, my colleagues, a couple of my colleagues in the room here with me, we've when we first started working with TES, we used to do these kind of master calendar assessments and to see like where are kind of the places where students just can't get past, and it's always been math. Math has always been the gatekeeper. But when you look at the number of, if you just look at one school and you look at the number of sections available in Algebra 1 versus geometry versus Algebra 2. I mean, the fact that they may or may not have one section of calculus, you don't even have to look that far. You have half the number of sections available in geometry that you do in algebra, and it's largely due to that issue, that you have to have so many, I mean, it's not just waving a wand and saying, yeah, we're just going to have all of these sections of calculus. You have to, as a school, make the choice that you need to have so many other sections of Algebra 1 because of so many students who, failed with an F, right? And you can pass and get credit with a D. But then what is the conversation you have with the student about? You have to make that up because Ds do not count for college. And it also isn't helpful for you moving on with that type of grade. It's not, even if, you want to take the conversation of college out of it, it's not going to help you continue on that. So those are the types of conversations that you're able, in this work that we're able to have with parents. It's not just here, it's not about giving them a handout and saying, here's the 15 minimum course requirements. Like Neil said, it never is that linear, and it's never that easy.
You're engaged with the parents. It's not just giving them information.
Yes.
It's a very deep engagement.
It's sitting down, having conversations and saying, well, for your child, it looks this way because this happened to happen. So what are the next steps, and who can you talk to, and how can you advocate for them?
And empowering them that if kindergarten, you said too, right? You get early.
Well, we have a curriculum that goes all the way down to kindergarten. So we have elementary schools having these really fabulous conversations with their parents starting then, because that's where if we can solidify the college aspirations and get past the worry of how much it costs, then we can get into conversations about the actual technical piece, which is the knowledge and the planning.
Annie, I just want to make sure that we get a little bit of a comment, and maybe there are questions and people who want to share. I also think math instruction is changing so rapidly in schools, and I really want to kind of point out and give credit to the classroom teachers and the technologists in the room, and to the many people who have wound together different ways of conceptualizing what it means to learn. And the prevalence of the technology, some used very, very thoughtfully, some used a little less thoughtfully in my judgment, and nevertheless the range of innovation and experimentation going on right now. Math classrooms, I'm in schools all the time, math classrooms, they don't look like my math class in 1972 as a grade school child. The teacher doesn't interact in the same way. The options and the alternatives for differentiated and personalized instruction are so different and changing. The demands on students to be able to communicate their reasoning and their skill and their explanations in foundational concepts has been really elevated as a priority in the way that we think about good instruction. And I see, as Jim pointed out, the applications over and over and over again of immersing students in the application and the practical application of what they're learning as really a heightened priority in our instructional skill building these days. So I hope we're breaking some traditions, frankly, in the way that we think about math instruction, and I hope that these then lead to greater levels of engagement and success for earlier grades.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because that gets into the old implications of Common Core math.
Of course, right.
And even I was having a conversation with Urban, who's out there someplace, I can't see him, talking about the challenge of elementary school teachers having to learn new way of math instruction. I have a question here from the audience. When is math acceleration the right choice for students, especially acceleration programs where students might, quote, skip a year of math through an intensive summer program? And, obviously the foundation we have our Elevate program to do that. What are your thoughts about helping students accelerate through that process? Any of you? You mentioned your algebra boot camps.
Yeah, well, I hear acceleration. I hope that doesn't mean shortcuts, because the foundational work around algebra for us is the most important thing, and that drives. I think of algebra as giving function to numbers,
Leads everything else.
and then calculus giving function to equations. So you have to have a basic basis of algebra, and I agree with you. It seems like the community colleges are watering down their prerequisites for algebra, which is a shame. But I think that if you, even at the younger grades, if you start focusing third graders on algebra and algebraic concepts wherever possible, that by 7th and 8th grade they should be able to start to use algebraic concepts on their own imaginatively. And the quicker you can take algebra, the better. So if you're talking about, I agree, they talk about algebra in 9th grade. If you get a D, it means nothing. Well, if you're in 6th grade, you get a D, actually it's helpful, right? So to know where your issues are much earlier when there's no risk involved is also a great example too. We're working with a program with Chabot College where with their Math 65 and 55, which is their remedial algebra classes, that are for students coming into community college who don't have a mastery of algebra. But instead of doing that for high school students, we're taking that curriculum and bringing it down to middle school students. So we've taken 65 concepts from the course that you need to be master in algebra, and we've turned it into sort of a game of like algebra ninja. So after you master 3 or 4 concepts, you can apply for the test to get your algebra white belt and green belt, so kids can understand the different elements of that, but also so they can begin that college experience and know that they're working on college material, even if it's remedial. And that has also helped, families too, because of any economic stratus, we have found that families are very happy with their 6th and 7th graders taking college credit courses. Whereas if you tell a 12th grader that you're going to go to community college, there's a different feeling about what that is for them. So,
that's a good point, yes.
So bringing that interest in college as soon as possible, and where you can still stay abstract about what it means. And I was 6th grade and I just finished a class in college. That narrative means a lot.
I just want to offer one kind of additional perspective on this. This acceleration question, and I'm glad somebody raised it. It's a little bit of a gorilla in the room in some of these conversations about what should the pacing be. And I would answer the question that these pathways are at different paces for different students in different settings for different reasons, and we need to understand and acknowledge that. As a way to counsel students and their families, I say pretty explicitly, start with what you want your course to be as a senior in high school and why. And it's the why that's actually more important than any of these other reasons. For some students, it is a calculus course by the time they're finished with their senior year in high school. For other students, it could be statistics or in a quantitative reasoning course. There are increasingly options for seniors. I would caution, though, that working backwards gets you into kind of a puzzle of a problem. Does a student who's 14 years old come to you at dinner and say, what I really want to do is take multivariable calculus as a senior in high school, and therefore I should be taking geometry when I'm 14 years old? There's no way that a 14-year-old would know the sequence and the structure in order to do that. And I do think we rely on our teams of teachers and schools to help us with that. There's also something to be really transparent about. Is it helpful for a student to be taking multivariable calculus as a senior in high school? Why? Toward what end? Would they have that option to take that level of math once they're in college if they choose to? Should they be studying math as a high school senior at the expense of other things that they might want to do or be interested in? Is there a strain and a stress to being that academically challenged at that young an age that we really do need to balance as we consider what some of these pacing decisions are? So yes, there's become a norm in order to get into selective institutions that calculus becomes important as a senior in high school, but it really is good for some and it's good at different pacing for others, and I'd really encourage folks to think about backward mapping to make sure that those foundation skills are really rock solid strong before we give students this idea that they should be moved faster.
That's great.
Absolutely.
I have a couple questions here.
Here,
One
here.
of the questions regarding lack of counselors, I'm going to save for the next group, whoever put that question. But here's one. I want to get these two questions. We have a couple of minutes left. For students who are, and I'll open this up to whoever wants to answer this. For students who are failing Algebra 1, ninth grade, what type of remediation should be implemented to get students on track? Or is it too late? So students have failed Algebra 1 in ninth grade. What type of remediation should be implemented to get them back on track? Is it too late at that time?
Well, I would say that's very personal. It depends on what school they go to, what access they have, whether or not the student, whether or not in consulting with the math teacher, asking whether or not that student would be a good candidate for an online course, if that's an option, if there's not a lot of, course remediation or the ability to have that kind of taken that course again. What does that mean? Some schools don't allow students to do it. If they have a D, they must get an F. It really depends on the student. And I would just like to say, I don't think it's ever too late, because what does that mean? It's never too late. So I always tell students, and this is how we train our advisors, you could have a senior who comes to you with a 0.8 GPA. You can have a really wonderful conversation with that student about what their senior year looks like and what it has to look like to continue to grow and learn and still be successful in whatever pathway they choose after high school. There's always a conversation to be had about that. That being said, it is difficult to have that remediation conversation with students, but there does need to be enough people to be able to support that. And if you look at when you're working in high schools, when you look at that DNF list for math, just math, not to mention English and all the other, it could be really overwhelming for staff. So that's where the importance of parents and the network and everyone else to be able to help advise that student and the best, way to move forward is so
I think the
important.
important message, Claudia, I'm glad you mentioned that, is it's challenging, but not too late. You can
never too
still change the trajectory.
Never too late.
Anyone else want to comment on that before?
Well, I would say that, first thing that came to my mind is like, how come when I hit this frying pan on my head, it keeps hurting? It's like, if they failed Algebra 1, a lot of times they're taking the same teacher who is working
Neil's
and
point.
those teachers, a lot of times I've heard them, well, I don't know why Johnny hasn't learned what he needed in middle school. I'm a high school, I don't know what he doesn't know already. So I'm spending half of the year finding out how the middle school screwed him up, right? Instead of sort of going forward. So I think how you offer that class, if it's the same class that they just failed at, there's a large chance that they're going to fail again with the same material.
Yes,
So why are they failing?
I remember
is
when the
really-
Common Core standards, the discussion was going on. I can't remember who said it. Might have been Phil Darrow, but we spend a lot of time repeating things over and over again in math, especially for the ones who take they don't learn new content.
That's
Is
right.
that kind of your,
Yes,
your
yes,
point?
yes,
Okay.
yes.
So here's a question. I think this will probably be the final one. I'll give you all a chance for a final point after this. But this question is, how critical is parents' education or passion in math, which might translate to kids excelling or taking math as an option in high school? And maybe I can kind of add on that. We talk about the mindset. Sometimes I hear people say, well, I wasn't good in math, implying that therefore, Jim, you're not good in math. Like if you're my kid. How important is that?
It's very
Open that up,
important. Very important, that, especially with, I hear math teachers telling kids, I'm not good at math.
Oh.
And
Yeah, that's not a good thing.
That's not a good thing. But I think it's very important to have a parent who has that background. But I think for those who don't, having a college-going network, and that can be uncles and aunts, or friends, or counselors, or pastors. It can be a lot of people, but to have a number of people in a child's life that they know by first name that have gone to college. And we do that in some of our classes too. When we do classes, we try to Skype in or bring in as mentors people who are doing math for a living as part of the curriculum, not sort of just as hey, there's Bob and he's a great person, but we're going to help this scientist do his statistical analysis. And once they know Mr. Simmons, that scientist, oh, I know Mr. Simmons, he's a nice guy. We have the same birthday. They start to relate to scientists and mathematicians a little differently. So sometimes because of our culture, we have built this whole thing about, oh, we don't like math, but we like people. So we try to focus on getting them connected to people who are doing math and science, and finding some strength through that, other than just the subject itself.
Any final comments for that? I want to thank you all. Please a hand for our panelists. Great conversation. So at this point, we're going to take a little bit 5-minute break while the next panel comes out. I understand the food has gotten here. Go get some, please, and then come on back, and we'll get started again. So I hope you enjoyed the conversation with that distinguished panel. A lot of wealth of knowledge and experience. And now we're going to move to our second panel. And to kind of get us started is Dr. Linda Murray, who is the former superintendent from San Jose Unified, who kind of, as I mentioned earlier, was kind of like the visionary behind the A to G focus. And where is Linda? She was right there. She is right here. So if Linda is going to come up, she's going to get us started, and then we'll have the panel, and we'll get things started. So thank you. How about a hand for Linda?
Hi, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I'm going to talk a little bit about ancient history, going back to the 90s when we began down the journey toward A to G for all in San Jose Unified, a very diverse community of learners. Nobody was doing this work at the time, and so we were kind of paving new ground, if you will, and dispelling a lot of myths along the way, and I'll talk about some of those myths as I go through the opening here. I want to start by kind of bridging from the last panel to this panel. Claudia talked about it's not so much whether kids go to college, why A to G is important. It's that it should be their choice, not ours, to determine what their future is after high school. We know that good jobs require more than high school, but we should not be the gatekeepers. We should be the gateway. That's what high school needs to become, a gateway to the future, no matter what a student's aspirations are after. So I'm Linda Murray. I'm currently doing some consulting work with an organization called XQ Institute, and the vision of the Institute is to transform high schools so that they work for all kids, and this is a national kind of a view. So I'm there with them because of the work that we started in San Jose in the mid-1990s, 20 years ago. And beginning with the class of 1998, the entering freshmen, A to G became the requirement in order to graduate. We didn't just jump into that really kind of wild-looking reform initiative. We spent a lot of time. We spent a lot of time thinking about what is high school and what should it be for our students in our community. And we looked at a lot of different factors that motivated us to begin to think deeply about how to give access to all kids. Certainly the job market demands were changing the horizon for everyone in our country. And back then, even 20 years ago, it was becoming increasingly clear that kids needed education beyond high school to get a good job, to get a career that would support a family, to become a part of the American dream. And at the time in San Jose Unified, very few students were completing the UC CSU entrance requirements, the A to G requirements. And we took a big pause and said, well, if we know the economy is changing, if we know the jobs out there are changing, why aren't we ratcheting up the level of education that we're giving to our students? And particularly because we were such a diverse district and the majority of the kids we were educating were quickly becoming students of color, students from poor backgrounds. Those were kids who were getting excluded most often from a pathway toward college and career. The A to G completion rates for Latino kids at the time were under 20%. And so we knew we had an imperative that we really dig deep and figure out how to give kids access to a great education. And finally, and probably most importantly, we did focus group work, formal focus group work with parents, teachers, students. And what we were finding was, particularly the kids were saying to us in these focus groups, high school's easy. You can get by doing very little. Nobody cares. It's all up to you. And sure, I could do a lot more if more were asked of me. So we really started to hear those voices. It was an interesting experience because the Board of Education and I stood behind a one-way mirror and listened to what the kids were saying. And we listened to what the parents were saying, that they wanted more for their children. They wanted their kids to have access to college if they chose. Teachers were a little more skeptical, I will say, in those early focus groups. But they believed that if they had the support they needed, if kids got the support they needed, that yes, kids could do it. So those were the kind of things that really motivated us to move. And by this focus group work and our looking at transcripts and seeing what kids were actually taking, made us believe that this was the right thing to do. And so in 1998, our board policy changed for graduation, and all kids were enrolled from then on in the A to G curriculum. Over 15 years, the first class graduated in 2002 under the A to G requirements. And boy, did we have a lot of people saying, you're crazy, this just can't work. All kids can't do this. And we found out a lot of things. We dispelled a lot of myths about who can and who can't. Certainly there's been a huge increase in college readiness rates for all subgroups of students. There was no increase in dropout rates. One of the big myths was, okay, you raise these standards and kids are going to quit. They're just not going to stay in school. It's too hard. Didn't happen. Didn't happen. Graduation rates stayed steady over that entire 15-year period of time. People said, okay, you can do this to kids, but their grades are going to go to heck in a handbasket. They're just going to have low grades. They're going to drop out of school, all those bad things. Grade point averages didn't change. In fact, they went up when we raised the graduation requirements. People said that if you do this, you're going to have to water down the curriculum. That's what's going to happen. The kids who could always do it are going to get less, so that the kids who didn't have access can get more. That didn't happen either. Our AP enrollments were going up, our pass rates in AP classes were going up over this period of time, and kids were being successful at much more rigorous standards. There was also a concern that high school is the wrong place to start. Why would you start in high school? You got to start in kindergarten. Well, we didn't believe that was true. We weren't going to wait 13 years from the time a student entered kindergarten until they graduated. We set the standard, we set the high water mark in high school, and guess what? We had a K-12 reform. It was, I sometimes called it the trickle-back effect, but our middle schools started to change, our elementary schools started to change. The emphasis on getting kids at the end of the pipeline ready for college created a whole different mindset across our K-12 spectrum. So I think we made a case. We established a proof point in San Jose Unified that requiring kids to take a rigorous course of study in high school has none of the bad effects that people feel will happen. Instead, it raises the bar for everyone. It raises the level of achievement for every kid. And so what happened? I was there for the first 2 graduating classes under A to G. And I can tell you, as a superintendent, when you stand on the podium shaking hands and handing a kid a diploma, and you think, finally, I'm handing this kid a diploma that means something. It's more than an empty promise because they met some minimal requirement. This means something. It's their ticket to the future, ticket to college, to career, to apprenticeship programs, to whatever they want to do after high school. And so I retired in 2004 from San Jose Unified, and I went to work with an organization called the Education Trust West in Oakland. And we took this on. The Ed Trust West was run by a woman named Ruslan Ali, who became the Undersecretary for Civil Rights under Obama, and has come back and is now heading up the XQ Institute, where I work with her now. But when I went to Ed Trust West, what she said to me is, we've got to take this story on the road. We've got to let other people know that this is possible. We need to create tools for them to go through a process to get from where they are, to get to the point where all kids are college and career ready. And so that's what we did. I worked with that organization for about 6 years, and we created tools. We created something called an educational opportunity audit, where we actually went into high schools across the state and audited them against the A to G requirements. How many kids are taking it? What kids are taking it? Who's not? What are the barriers toward being successful in an A to G curriculum? What are the safety nets that have been put in place to make sure that if kids start to struggle, there's something there to catch them? And so we've taken this audit on the road all over California. One of our panelists is currently doing that work with the Ed Trust West, and it's been very successful in moving the bar. Over 12, probably more, almost 15 now, Sarah, is that right? Districts in California have gone through an audit process. And we're now at XQ thinking about how to scale this kind of work across our whole country so that it can have an impact on many, 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 many more kids than we've been able to impact in California. And so we're automating tools. We're making it very easy to do an audit. and to get results that help you plan for the future. How are we going to move from where we are now to the point where all kids have access to a college and career preparatory curriculum? We've had success in California, as I said, more than 12 districts, probably closer to 15 now. And what we found is by doing this audit work and by really digging deep into what's happening to students in their high school experience and planning to change the odds for kids so they graduate with choice. In districts that have gone through this process, twice as many, in many cases, are now, twice as many kids in those districts are now ready for college when they graduate. 3 times as many students of color, students from poor backgrounds, are ready for college. So the impact has been huge. And you're going to hear a little more about what districts that have gone through this process have found. Eastside Union High School District, the Ed Trust West have gone through this process, or led it, and now have a story to tell. One more thing. In all these audits that have been going on around our state, what are some of the common barriers in the way of kids getting through a college and career preparatory curriculum? Poor grades. This has been mentioned on the previous panel. A D grade doesn't count to get into the CSUs and UCs. You have to have a C or better in every class. But a D usually counts for graduation. So many kids get knocked out of being eligible to apply to a UC or CSU because of a D. Sometimes it's 1 D. In one large district, 1,000 kids missed A to G eligibility because they had 1 D along the way that they hadn't made up. Poor performance in the 9th grade. If you get low grades or do poorly in any of the academic core in the 9th grade, the likelihood of graduating college ready goes straight down. It's less than 10% in cases that we've looked at deeply. Less than 10% of the graduates who ended up A to G eligible had a good record in their 9th grade. So that 9th grade experience, and as somebody said, the middle schools as well, are so important for success in the future. Tracking is alive and well in California schools. Kids are in a college track or they're in a general track. And what surprised me maybe the most is if a kid starts in 9th grade sort of in a general track and they do very well, they don't move up. If they start in a college track and do poorly, they drop down and never come back. So, you know, the institution itself is structured for a tracking system. We find in audits that there are very few just-in-time interventions. So when a kid starts to struggle, there's something there to catch them and to catch them up so they can move forward. Usually, they have to fail the class before they get any help. And sometimes the intervention is take it again, as was said before. So does a double dose of algebra make you a better algebra student? If it's done in the same way, sometimes with the same teacher, probably not. Low expectations still are prevalent in schools throughout our state. There are people who just don't believe kids can do it. That's got to change. It's got to change, and we have to work at that. It doesn't change overnight, and it doesn't change because I'm up here lecturing you. It changes because teachers have the experience of having kids in their classes that they never would have thought could succeed, and they see them doing the work. That's what changes attitudes and expectations. And finally, a common finding in our audit work is that the aspirations of students and their parents for college don't match what they're getting in high school. when you sit in a room full of parents, a room that's full of parents, or a room that's full of students, and you say, how many of you want to go to college? Or how many of you want your child to go to college? Hands go up almost unanimously. Everyone wants a better world in the future for their children. Children think they can get to college, but they're not in the classes that get them there. So all of this, all of these barriers are things that we as adults have created. We have to own it, and we have to change it. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. So let's have the panel come on up. Now you know why I call her the mother of A to G. I think it's- And I'm going to ask the panelists again to say something about themselves, and we're going to start first with Julian Betts, who has he has a set of slides that he's going to share relative to some of the work that he's done in San Diego. He's flown up here, had a chance to work a little bit with Julian and present together on this issue. He has studied A to G, and we're very appreciative that you flew all the way up here to be part of with us here today. So
Whole hour.
a whole hour. It probably took you. Probably
lots
took
of
me
time.
longer for me to get here from San Jose than for you to fly here, actually. And then we'll get to the rest of the panelists. But Julian, we'll start with you, and you can
Okay.
kind of get started.
Okay. Well, my name is Julian Betts. I'm Executive Director of the San Diego Education Research Alliance at UC San Diego, and we've been working with San Diego Unified for 17 years now. And I want to talk to you about some of the work we've been doing. San Diego is one of these districts that worked with Ed Trust West with an audit, decided to implement A to G. So I just want to show you some results from that. Well, there's a dated slide. Does anybody remember President Obama? During his term, he repeatedly called for high schools to serve two roles: to prepare students for college and career. And the ACLU actually deserves credit for some of the A to G reforms in California as well. It lobbied a lot of the largest school districts, including LA Unified, San Diego Unified, and others, about the need to increase access to A to G courses. And as a result of that, San Diego Unified invited Ed Trust in to do an audit. And there was some patchiness in terms of A to G course taking across schools. And the school board decided in 2012 that their students were going to require A to G courses in order to graduate from high school. A lot of the other districts in California have done this as well, of course. So what I'm going to be telling you about today is a series of studies that we've done about how San Diego has fared with that. I think I can go quickly through this slide. Neil and others have talked to you about what the A to G course sequence is, but I think I should emphasize the areas in which this was a challenge for San Diego. And for other districts that may be contemplating this, it's important to know San Diego was actually pretty close to the A to G requirements when it implemented this reform. The two areas with the biggest changes were math and language other than English. And math in particular, it was close in some ways but not in others. It already required 3 years of math, but it did not require Algebra 2 or intermediate algebra as one of those 3 courses. And that's a big change. And this is pretty notable. Research I've done with Heather Rose, who's now at UC Davis, has found, using a national data set, that the single course taken in high school is most strongly correlated not just with college graduation, but with earnings 10 years after graduation from high school is, guess what? Intermediate algebra. One thing I should say about San Diego and the other districts I know of that have implemented this A to G graduation requirement is they've allowed grades to be D or higher. And some people have criticized that, but I think when you see the numbers and you think from the point of view of a superintendent, it actually makes an awful lot of sense. There's a world difference between getting everybody graduating with grades of C versus D, and they want to do this one step at a time. So the idea is to equalize access in the sense that literally everybody in San Diego is taking the A to G courses. It's now up to the students and their teachers with suitable supports to get those grades of C to get into Cal State or UC. So we've done 4 studies. Just very quickly, the very first one was published through the Public Policy Institute of California. And just to sort of set the table, what we did is we looked at the class of 2011 and we just asked, well, suppose you surprised kids in June of 2011 and said, you know what, you need to have completed A to G in order to graduate. Well, only 61% would have actually fulfilled that requirement with grades of D or higher. So that's obviously a floor. The district's going to do better at that in the future because now kids are being required to complete A to G. Our second study, which we published through Sandera at UCSD in 2015, followed the class of 2016, which was the first class required to complete A to G through grades 9, 10, and so on. And we saw that kids were taking more courses and completing more courses in A to G than older cohorts had. And it was statistically significant. This was meaningful. Our third report, which the PPIC published winter last year, looked at the class of 2016 right up through August 2015. So a week before students are poised to enter grade 12, how did things look? It did not look good. Only 72% of students were on track to complete A to G on time, in the sense that they had at least one subject. 28% of students had at least one subject with more than a year of work yet to complete. Now, this is in a district where the graduation rate has been typically 88, 89% the last few years. So 72% sounds a little bit worrying. So first I'm going to tell you about what we found at the end of grade 11, then I'm going to tell you about our most recent report, about what actually happened. So the next 3 slides, just to be really clear, this is looking at the end of grade 11, end of August, so we're incorporating summer school after grade 11. And things were not looking good. Just very quickly, this slide is showing the percent of students who are on track to complete A to G on time. The top set of bars is showing you racial and ethnic differences, Hispanic and African American students lagging behind. The middle set of bars is looking at parental education, and it's quite astonishing. It's almost a linear relationship between these categories of parents' education and how prepared students were. And I'll draw your attention in particular to the bottom 2 pairs of bars. Fewer than 50% of students who were in special education as of grade 11, and fewer than 50% of students who were still English learners as of grade 11 were on track to complete A to G. What were the holdups? This table, the graph tells you a little bit. What we're showing here is each of the A to G requirements, and we're showing how many students had 0 to 2 courses to complete, semester courses. So the blue part of each bar is showing the percentage of students who had 0 to 2 semester courses to complete in each subject. Should be a cakewalk for them, right? They've got only a year or less of work to do. All the colored bars are showing the percentage of students who had maybe 1 extra semester to complete, or 3 or 4 or 5. And you'll see that English, math, and world languages were the biggest barriers at this time, and English in particular, which shouldn't surprise you given how many students are English learners in San Diego. Here's a graph just showing that over time, there's been an increase in the percentage of students attempting A to G classes, completing with grades of C or higher, or completing with grades of D or higher. And to the right of that vertical line there, you'll see the class of 2016. It may be hard to see from the back of the room, but there's a statistically meaningful break from trend. That class of 2016 was breaking away from what was already a positive trend. So our new report, which just came out last month, looked at the class of 2016 now that we actually have the graduation data. And remember, we'd predicted that only 72% of students at the start of grade 12 were on track to complete A to G. The actual percentage completing A to G with grades of D or higher was 80.3% by our calculation. So in 1 year, that's a meaningful improvement in what happened. Why were these improvements possible? Well, one thing the district did, which I think was really smart, was that they recognized that there were some students from some African immigrants who were learning Spanish as a third language while they're still trying to learn English as a second language. And so they've come up with a number of home language exams that are accredited by the University of California, and that really helped ease the language other than English requirement. The second thing they did is they had, and a lot of other districts have done this as well, is to implement widespread use of online courses, both for credit recovery and for first-time taking, with a focus on grade 12 students. And the district has spent a lot of money on expanding summer school. So For kids who didn't make it the first time, it was this question, well, what happens when you don't pass Algebra 1 by the end of grade 9? Summer school made a tangible difference in San Diego. Now, the official graduation rate was 91.2%. And you might find that a little bit jarring, because I told you that A to G was a graduation requirement, and only 80.3% completed A to G. Why the difference? Well, we're following students from essentially grade 9 forward, and about 1 out of 10 students left the district between grades 11 and 12, and almost all of the students who left were off track to complete A to G. Many of these students left for charter schools, and I don't think this is a widely known fact in the general public, but when you see a district's graduation rate, it does not include students who've transferred to charter schools. Just very quickly to show you the differences between students who stayed for grade 12 and students who left for other districts or charters. The blue bars are showing the students who re-enrolled. The orange bars are showing students who stayed. The orange bars are showing students who left. And we're showing students here by the number of subject areas in which they had more than a year's worth of work to complete. And you'll see for the blue bars, remember that's the students who re-enrolled, about 76% of them were completely on track at that point. But you'll see that 40% of the students who left had more than a year's worth of work to complete in 5 subject areas in A to G, and the median student had 4 subject areas. So the people who left were very different from the people who stayed, and we need to bear that in mind. Here's another way of showing this. In this graph, we're showing 10 students who completed grade 11. 7 out of 10 are on track. The 3 ones colored in red are the 3 who are off track. And then down below, we're showing what happened in grade 12. Well, the first thing is that one of those students out of 10 who was off track left district managed schools. Of the 2 remaining students, 1 actually made it, caught up, and actually was able to complete A to G and graduate on time. One of the other 3 out of 10 stayed in the district managed schools, but did not graduate on time. So overall, to conclude, where we are in San Diego Unified is there really has been a quite major improvement in the A to G completion rate with D or higher. It was 61% back in 2011. It's now 80%. And I should have mentioned that the percent of students completing A to G with grades of C or higher jumped by about 7 percentage points just between the classes of 2015 and 2016. And there's been about a 15 percentage point increase in college readiness in the sense of percent of people graduating having completed A to G with grades of C or higher. I think we're at 59.7% now in a district where roughly 2/3 of students are on meal assistance. The graduation rate obviously is a lot higher than the 80% completion rate I've been telling you about for A to G, and that's because many students left right before grade 12. So there are huge successes in San Diego, and yet some real challenges. And I think the main challenge is how do we retain more students in district managed schools and help them get over the hump so they can complete the A to G standards, which only a few of the charter schools in San Diego actually require. What about advice for other districts that are contemplating this? Well, providing supports in math and English in particular as early as middle school is important. And in fact, I really think elementary school is where a lot of students fall behind. One of the smart things that San Diego Unified did after the Ed Trust audit was to make sure that all middle schools had language other than English courses that were college accredited. That was a major gap initially, and that's been solved. So access is really key. Other things that I think really helped in San Diego is they spent a lot more money on supports, such as summer school and online courses. And one of the least, I think, recognized things in San Diego that the administration did was that Cheryl Hibble and her team of counselors in the central district offices created a spreadsheet, every single student who was a senior, looking at every course they'd taken, every course they needed to complete before they got into grade 12, and almost in real time looked at actual course placements and notified schools if mistakes had been made. That's really important in a state where the student to counselor ratio, I think, is second or third highest in the country. One final point is that I think it's really important for districts who undertake this bold A to G strategy to really think about being as transparent as possible and educating the public. And that means not only publishing the graduation rate, which excludes people who leave, but also taking a cohort of students who arrive in grade 9 and each year reporting how many of those students have stayed and how many have left in each grade, from grade 9 to 10, 10 to 11, and so on. Of the people who left, how many were on track to complete A to G, how many were off track? Of those leaving and off track, what was their race and ethnicity? How many were English learners? How many had special education needs? Another thing that many large urban districts, which have a large number of charter schools, might think about doing is on their own calculating graduation rates, including the traditional public schools and the charters. Because in the end, we really are supposed to be one system serving a common purpose, which is getting all students ready for career and college. If any of you are interested in reports, you can find them at the Sandera website or at the Public Policy Institute of California website at ppic.org. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian. So Sarah and Chris, you've heard these presentations, and so I'm going to I'll start with Sarah, who's from EdTrust. Did you bring these by any chance? I'm
I
curious.
did,
So
and also this handout as well.
EdTrust puts out a lot of really excellent work, and so you heard Jim Hollis earlier talk about the lack of specifically African Americans in calculus, right? And you've heard the data from Neil and from Julian and from Linda. What needs to happen to change that? Of course, that's been your advocacy.
Sure. So I love this question. Thank you. So I think what needs to change is high quality teaching for every single student in public schools. And what needs to change is teaching for mastery. Teaching for mastery to the standards is hard. It requires supports and interventions and supports when students didn't get it the first time around that it was taught. And what this could look like can take a myriad of forms and shapes. So imagine, for instance, in a high school that typically you have AP calculus classes that are quite small and quite white and Asian, typically, is what we see. Imagine if the teacher for the AP calculus course also taught 9th grade math and was going to grow that cohort of students and work with the 9th graders and then moves up with them when they become 10th graders, moves up with them when they become 11th graders, so that teacher is grooming the students for getting ready for calculus senior year and taking responsibility for what does it mean to teach for mastery to ensure that no student is actually not going to make it to that high academic level. It's about setting high academic expectations and supporting students to reach those expectations.
Thank you. And you said you did bring some of those, so I bring
Yes, so there are
attention.
copies of Hear My Voice, there's copies of Unlocking Learning, and then I also have a short little handout on the A through G stuff here.
So I mentioned earlier that one of the advantages of my job after I retired is I get to meet some outstanding people. I also get to work closely with some outstanding people. I previously mentioned the outstanding superintendent from East Side, Dan Mosier, who first worked on A to G. And nothing helps a district better than to follow one outstanding superintendent with another, and that's what Chris Funk is here. And Chris, you're the practitioner here, right? So we got advocates.
So they say.
You're the one that's doing the work out there. First of all, before I even ask the specific question, you've heard a lot. Do you have any general reactions in terms of the work you're doing in East Side, or just responding and kind of go from there?
So there was nothing that I necessarily disagree with. There was a lot that I agree with. But I think we also have to change some focus. So I was part of San Jose Unified. I was an administrator when A through G came into place at Abraham Lincoln High School. And the mindset was the biggest piece, particularly around the teachers. The professional development that was needed to up their game was critical. And then the support systems that were put in place was also very important for our students, not just to have access, but the scaffolding that needed to happen to be successful. 2010 Eastside Board passed a resolution to have all of our curriculum A through G default. We currently, if you take our charter students, charter schools out, we're at 55.9%. When you include the charters, we're just below 50%. So when Eastside moves A through G needle, the county is actually moved because of our size. We have 24,000 students at 11 comprehensive schools.
Actually, when you go up 3%, the entire county goes up 1%.
Well,
So it's a lot.
So you
Yeah.
said that better than I did, so
Yeah.
thank you for that. And so we're very proud of that. Now, do we still have a lot of work to do because of the gap that's there with some of our subgroups? Absolutely. It's interesting looking at the data because one of the things that I believe is important is when you look at Eastside's overall graduation rate, we're at 85% state defined. But we also look at our locally defined cohort, students that start with us and finish with us, and we're at 96%. Our African American students are 95%. Our Hispanic students are 91%. You look at the state defined, we're at 85%, African Americans are at 83%, and our Latinos are at 77%. So we still have work to do when students come to us at some point in the 4 years. That's where we have our biggest gaps in the system. And so trying to meet the A through G requirements, we don't do a very good job, or we need to do a better job of meeting kids where they're at and building a 4-year plan for them.
But that's some pretty good data points, though. I'm glad you mentioned that the kids that start with you are pretty successful.
I'll
in
compare
terms
them
of-
to any school district or any
Yeah.
high school in the county.
Yeah, because I think it would be a fair assessment to say that you probably have more mobility than, say, a Palo Alto.
True, but we have more kids that fall within that locally defined cohort than
Yeah.
kids that come and go.
They come in there. That's great. So I'll get back to you there in a little bit, Chris. Sarah, I want to ask you a question relative to some of the ADG work. 'Cause if there's anybody out there thinking about it, and we've both worked on this, what are some of the barriers? Like what have you run into that keeps this from happening?
So thank you for asking.
And by the way, please feel free to jump
Yeah.
in. Okay.
So Linda pointed out a bunch of them, sort of the key ones that come up again and again and again in her presentation. There's this handout. There's copies for everybody, and if you turn to the last page of it, these are some common issues that come up when we're doing the equity audits. And so what I've put here are some questions to ask when you're looking at your district, when you're looking at your schools, things that typically come up. So the first being graduation requirements. Can a student graduate from your district and not be ready for the public university system? Can that happen in your district? The master schedule. Do teacher preferences guide what courses are offered, or is it based on what students need? Are there enough subjects of the higher math classes for students so that they graduate ready? Are English learners and students with disabilities, are their courses scheduled at the same time as courses that they would need to be college and career ready? What kinds of tutorials and supports are provided during the day? Taking a look at the district level, systemic change. So looking at how A through G courses get approved with UCOP, it has to happen every single year. Raise your hand if you went to public high school in California. Who in the room here? Okay, so this is a very unusual system that we have here in California, where the UCOP is actually asking every single district and high school to send the syllabi and their courses to them for a stamp of approval to say this is an A through G approved course. That doesn't happen in most states, just so you know. It's very unusual and specific to California. And so in order to make sure that a district is ahead of the game, 2 steps ahead, you have to make sure that every single course on that master list every single year gets approved and is properly coded. And when we go in and do these audits, we find a lot of times there's a lot of bureaucratic mistakes that just need to be cleaned up. And they're easy fixes, but they need to be cleaned up. Otherwise, it impacts the future for a student in terms of whether or not when they go online to apply to UC and CSU, whether or not their transcript bounces back and they get rejected, or whether it goes through and they get accepted to college. The role of the counselor. Is the role of the counselor in your school and district to make sure students are going to graduate, or is it to also to make sure that they are graduating college and career ready? What we focus on matters. And right now, folks are focusing on graduating. They're not necessarily focusing on college and career readiness when they're doing the counseling and placing students in courses. Another one, looking at teacher grading practices. Can a student make up a test or a paper for full credit? Is grading consistent across teaching staff? How do those practices work, right? Assignments. Are the assignments rigorous and teaching to the standards? Are the ELD standards woven into content instruction in every single area? In many of our districts, more than 50% of our students are English learners. So we have to change our teaching to make sure that the ELD standards are woven into instruction to support all students. D and F grades. This is the big one that Linda raised. What happens when a student gets a D or an F in a class? How are families and students notified? How are they told about whether they're on track or off track for A through G? Is it just the once a year when junior or senior year when they're getting ready to apply for college and they see their transcript for the first time? Or is it earlier than that so they can actually do something about it? What academic supports are provided at each site? What's the distribution of resources in terms of equity? Do the LCAP dollars follow the unduplicated students that they were intended for? What's the vertical alignment happening for professional development in the district? Is elementary talking to middle, talking to secondary? Is there actually a vertical alignment around what's happening so that we start looking at equity, not waiting till secondary school, but actually starting in the primary grades and starting to figure out kindergarten readiness, math and reading by third grade, fifth grade math, looking at reclassification rates of English learners and what are the processes around that. All of those issues that are really important in elementary school contribute to what happens later on for middle and high school trajectories.
That's great. So, Chris, you're a high school district, and as we heard from Neil, you hear college begins in middle school. How do you articulate with the middle schools and the elementary districts?
So in Eastside, we have what's called the Eastside Alliance because we have 7 feeder districts into the high school system, which means there are 7 different superintendents with their board of trustees. And so one of the things that has been so nice working with the Silicon Valley Education Foundation is that we have articulation around math placement, and that happened 2 years prior to me even arriving to Eastside. So the works has been going on now for 8 years. And what is nice is we also provide that articulation around the training. So when you look at our math symposiums, you'll see anywhere from 80 to 125 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th grade teachers working together on their professional development. And that's facilitated by the Silicon Valley Education Foundation. And that's a critical component. But I also believe that if we're going to really have a major impact, we have to change the system of education. And you mentioned 5th grade. I think 5th grade is a critical point where we have multiple subject teachers, and the majority of those teachers are not comfortable or proficient teaching math. We're asking them to do an unbelievable task of creating lesson plans for 4 to 6 subjects a day and asking them to be professional and have their content knowledge at a level that will meet the needs of our students. If we don't change how we provide education to our students and the time and the place and the setting for that, we'll continue to have these achievement gaps. So I believe A through G and college readiness goes much further than middle school.
Joe, please jump in.
Yeah, I agree with that strongly. We're working with 4 high needs middle schools in San Diego right now with a math intervention. These are great teachers, lots of professional development. They have a huge amount of pedagogical knowledge. What they already knew and what we're finding through diagnostic math testing through the MDTP is that students are arriving in middle school not having mastered some of the basics that they should already have under their belts, such as fractions. And their knowledge of this doesn't improve a lot during middle school. So college does not start in middle school. It starts in kindergarten. I'm sorry, Manny, it's even worse. If you're behind in math by middle school, it's really hard for the middle school math teachers because they've got their own curriculum that they need to push on. So we're working with them to try to find ways to, when you're teaching geometry, calculating the perimeter of a polygon, Why does that perimeter have to be in integers? It can be in fractions, but ways to build practice with some of the elementary school skills into the middle school curriculum.
So let me throw this out, and then come and then all of you respond. And Sarah, I'd like your reaction to this too, because I know you came a little bit late, but it does begin earlier. So one of the advocacy that we have is the importance of extended time. If they start middle school behind, they are not going to catch up without extended, accelerated time during the summer. The other part is that I'd like you to react to, all of you, is the importance of 4 years of math once they get to high school. Now, I mentioned that Long Beach is looking at that. Is that realistic? Is that something San Diego's looking at? Something that Ed Trust is looking at? Linda, you're past superintendent. Chris, you're there. The importance of extended time and the 4 years of math. Is that a realistic expectation?
You want me to start?
Yeah, Elvis, just jump in.
Sure. I think it's realistic for a lot of students. It's going to be a push for some. It's going to be really hard for some. When we looked at past students who had completed A to G with grades of C or higher, they weren't completing the minimum 15 courses. They were completing typically 22, 23 year-long courses or more. So that's why you need to be competitively eligible for, the more competitive Cal States and so on. So a fourth year of math, why 2 years of lab science? It extends to science as well. Extra time is critical. One thing that San Diego's been doing for about 17 years now is having double-length classes in English and math for students who are behind. So yes, summer school is important, but it's during the year as well, and that's of course especially crucial for English
Extended
learners.
time during the year.
Yeah.
Sarah, Linda, go right ahead. Yeah, jump in.
Yeah, just a observation. When you hold, if you're going to have A to G for all, and every student is held to the same rigorous standards in their high school career, the only thing you have control over is time. And some kids, it's going to take more time to reach those standards. So extending time is one of the things that we find always necessary when we do audits in districts, that those just-in-time interventions become available because you have a double block or because you have a seventh period or a early start period, so that kids can get help right when they start to struggle. And it is time that's the variable that we can control.
Well, I think not only can we control the time, but we can control the course and the graduation requirements. If you keep the graduation requirements the same, or in San Jose Unified, you actually increase the graduation requirements when you have the A through G default, you don't have any time in the student's schedule to do the credit recovery or to fill the gaps. You're now asking that student to go beyond their time to either take a seventh period, to go to Saturday school, to go to summer school. And so if you don't change the graduation requirements to create more time, all you're doing is putting the time on the student, and the student is now feeling, I have to take a double dose of math or English. They're being punished, as opposed to creating a structure that allows them to learn at their rate.
That is an excellent point. Sarah, anything you want to comment on that?
I completely agree. So we have a new report coming out in January focusing on English learners and math education in California. And one of the things we learned from doing this research, a qualitative study, was that there are huge language requirements embedded in math now, in the math curriculum. The Common Core Math requires so much more use of language in order to do the math problems. And for English learners, that means students need much more scaffolding and opportunities to engage in conversation and processing and understanding of that language in order to be able to do the math problems that are being asked of them in the curriculum. So absolutely, more time is needed, but we also have to think creatively about what those math courses might look like, because we need a focus on language development within them if we're going to serve our English learners well.
Thank you. Chris, you get the last word. If you had unlimited resources, right, you could do, like, money was no object, you're in charge of everything. We hear a lot about reform. What would you do?
Extended day, extended year would be the number two things that I would do.
The time again.
The time. And it's not so that they do more, it's so that they can actually go in depth. I mean, we know our students through Elevate Math, through the summer program, when they're given the time to slow down, go deep, and apply their learning, that not only do they improve their grade from the previous year, but then the next year when they take the higher level math, they do well. So if an incoming freshman we know is struggling, why does that freshman have to have 6 courses? Why couldn't they just have 4, but 2 or 3 of those courses are offered in a longer period of the day?
And very quickly, because this was a question someone asked, and Sarah kind of alluded to it, but can you discuss the role of lack of counselors regarding A to G knowledge? Are you being impacted? You're obviously, financially, you have a situation where, I mean, I know Palo Alto, $7,000 more per student. Is that impacting?
Well, it's definitely impacting, particularly since we have a deficit and we're going to be laying off individuals here come March. But to me, it's not just the role of the counselor. It's the school-wide community that's involved with educating our students around college culture. If you just rely on one classification, there's too much to do and not enough time for them to do that. It's got to be a shared message for everyone.
Thank you so much. Can we have a big hand for this panel and the other one? Really, thank you. I want to thank all of you for coming. I'd like to also acknowledge the prior panel again. The first panel, the Google for the facility and the grant to help us fund this, and also the Silicon Valley Education Foundation staff. Please raise your hand. Thank you for being here. Especially my assistant, Michelle, who was working late into the night and early this morning. So thank you very much, Michelle. Thank you for coming, everyone.